Today we're diving into one of the most disturbing and haunting cases in Canadian history, the case of Robert Pickton, the pig farmer from British Columbia whose name is forever linked with the disappearances of dozens of women from Vancouver's downtown east side. This case shocked the nation not only because of its gruesome details, but because of how long it went on and how many warning signs were missed. For years, vulnerable women were going missing and no one was really listening until it was too late. Apologies ahead of time if I mispronounce any names or locations. Robert Pickton was born on October 24th, 1949 to Leonard Pickton and Louise Arnall. They were a family of pig farmers in Port Coquitlam, British Columbia, which is 27 kilometers east of Vancouver. Pickton's older sister Linda was sent to live with relatives in Vancouver because their parents thought that raising a young girl on the family pig farm would be an inappropriate setting. Pickton and his younger brother David started working on the farm at a very early age. Their mother was reportedly a very demanding person and prioritized the pigs over the boys' personal hygiene and forced them to work long hours raising the livestock on the farm. Louise would often send the brothers to school in dirty, unwashed clothing, stinking of manure, resulting in them getting the nickname Stinky Piggy from their classmates. Pickton had been very attached to his mother and rarely interacted with his abusive father. He had struggled a lot in school and was put into a special class after he failed grade 2. When Pickton was 12, he started raising a calf that became his beloved pet. 2 weeks later, when Pickton got home from school, he was unable to find his pet. He was told to check the barn and became distraught to find that his calf had been slaughtered. As a huge animal lover myself, and as someone who treats all of my animals like my own children, I couldn't even imagine what the young Pickton would have felt when he saw that the pet he had grown to love had been slaughtered laying on the floor of the barn. That has got to be so traumatizing as a young child. In 1963, Pickton dropped out of school and began working as a meat cutter. He would work as a meat cutter for 7 years before leaving that profession to work full-time on the family farm. In 1978 and 1979, Pickton's parents had passed away, leaving the siblings to inherit the farm. Bill Hiscock, a worker on the farm, had described it as a creepy-looking place patrolled by a 612-pound boar. Bill also described Pickton as, quote, a pretty quiet guy, hard to strike up a conversation with. Pickton became wealthy by selling parts of the farmland to property developers as the economy in the Lower Mainland grew in the 1980s and 90s. He would often host parties at an ad hoc nightclub called Piggy's Palace, which attracted political and economic elites from the Lower Mainland as well as members of the Hells Angels. In the 1990s, women from the Lower Mainland, mostly those on the impoverished side of the downtown east side of Vancouver, started going missing. The media speculated that there was a serial killer operating. Most of the women who had gone missing were Indigenous, those with substance issues and workers. On March 22, 1997, Pickton had taken a woman to his farm where she fought back when he attempted to handcuff her. She grabbed a knife, and during the struggle, they both received serious stab wounds. The woman was able to escape and run to the road where she flagged down a car, and the occupants called an ambulance. She was taken to the Royal Columbian Hospital in New Westminster. Pickton was receiving treatment for his injuries in the same hospital while the woman was undergoing emergency surgery. A hospital orderly found a key in Pickton's pocket that fit the handcuffs on the woman's wrist. Pickton was then arrested and charged with attempted murder, assault with a weapon, and forcible confinement. The charges were stayed and eventually dropped because the woman, whose name was placed under the protection of a publication ban, was not considered to be a reliable witness due to her substance addictions. Pickton would claim that she was a hitchhiker who attacked him. For those of you who don't know, because I definitely didn't, a stay of proceedings is a ruling by the court in civil and criminal procedure that halts further legal process in a trial or other legal proceedings. The court can subsequently lift the stay and resume proceedings based on events taking place after the stay is ordered. However, a stay is sometimes used as a device to postpone proceedings indefinitely. So I understand that people with addictions are seen as unreliable. However, if they had just taken a chance on the first reported victim, they might have been able to save other women's lives. So it is so tragic that Pickton was released to continue his horrible act. David Pickton was convicted of SA in 1992 and was fined $1,000 and given 30 days probation. The victim in that case told police that David attacked her while she was in his trailer at the pig farm, but she was able to escape. The Pickton brothers were sued by officials for violating zoning ordinances, neglecting the agriculture of which it had been zoned, and altering a large farming building on the land for the purpose of holding concerts, dances, and other recreations. The brothers started to neglect the site's farming operations and had registered a non-profit charity called the Piggy Palace Good Times Society with the Canadian government in 1996. They claimed to, quote, organize, coordinate, manage, and operate special events, functions, dances, shows, and exhibitions on behalf of service organizations, sports organizations, and other worthy groups. I think it is absolutely disgusting that they registered a non-profit charity for the purposes of partying and all the other horrific acts that they had performed there. The events they hosted included raves and wild parties that featured the workers of Vancouver and gatherings in a converted slaughterhouse on the farm. The events attracted up to 2,000 people, and members of the Hells Angels were known to frequent the farm. The Pickton brothers continued to ignore the growing legal pressures and held a 1998 New Year's Eve party. They were served with an injunction banning future parties. The police had been authorized to, quote, arrest and remove any person that attend future events at the farm. Their nonprofit status was removed the following year as they were unable to produce financial statements. In 1999, Bill Hiscock told the RCMP that Lisa Yields, who was a close friend of Pickton, told him that she had seen women's clothing, purses, and identification at the pig farm. Bill had believed that these were owned by the missing women. Police had questioned Lisa, but she had been uncooperative. This was the second time that Bill had contacted the police about his suspicions, but they had not obtained a search warrant based on the hearsay evidence. They required an eyewitness report of criminal activity or physical evidence. That has got to be frustrating for Bill because he was trying so hard to stop Pickton. But on the other hand, I also understand that the police can't just go around searching people's properties without sufficient evidence because otherwise we'd all be raided at some point, right? So that's really a tough situation to be in on either side. In 2001, a joint task force was formed called Project Even-Handed to investigate the missing women from the downtown east side. In February 2002, a former employee of the Pickton family, truck driver Scott Chubb, reported to the RCMP that he had personally seen illegal firearms in the Pickton's trailer. Finally, information that met the requirements of a search warrant. February 5th, officers of the task force raided the pig farm. In addition to the illegal firearms, they found items that were connected to the missing women to the property. Pickton had been arrested on the charges and released on bail. He was kept under surveillance and was not allowed to return to the pig farm while the police were conducting their searches under a second warrant. They discovered lots of evidence, which included handcuffs, women's clothing and shoes, jewelry, and an asthma inhaler that was prescribed to Serena Abbotsway, who was also one of the missing women. Blood found in the trailer on the property was tested, which proved to be the DNA of Mona Wilson. On February 22, 2002, Pickton was arrested again and was charged with 2 counts of first degree in the deaths of Serena Abbotsway and Mona Wilson. On April 2nd, 3 more charges were added for the murders of Jacqueline McDonald, Diana Rock, and Heather Bottomley. A 6th charge was laid on April 9th for the murder of Andrea Joesbury, and a 7th charge was laid for Brenda Wolfe shortly after. 4 more charges were laid for Georgina Papin, Patricia Johnson, Helen Hallmark, and Jennifer Firminger on September 20th. October 3rd, another 4 charges were laid for Heather Chinook, Tanya Hawley, Cheryl Irving, and Inga Hall. May 26, 2005, 12 more charges came for Kara Ellis, Andrea Borhaven, Deborah Lynn Jones, Marnie Frey, Tiffany Drew, Carrie Koski, Sarah DeVries, Cynthia Felix, Angela Jardine, Wendy Crawford, Diana Melnick, and Jane Doe, bringing the total count to 27. 27 poor women lost their lives at the hand of Pickton, and likely hadn't even been given a second thought when it was realized that they were missing because they were sex workers. And by that, I mean like mostly authority figures. I'm sure their friends and family were probably concerned about them, but I feel like with this and other cases, a lot of people that were related to sex work were just disregarded by authorities and even the media as just sort of trash, like who cares about them, which is not cool. While Pickton was being held in a Surrey jail, he shared a cell with an undercover RCMP officer that he thought was another detainee. Pickton confided to the undercover officer that he had murdered 49 women and wanted to make it 50. They continued to excavate the farm through November 2003. According to the provincial government, the cost of the investigation is estimated to have been $70 million by the end of 2003. The property had been fenced off under a lien by the Crown in right of British Columbia and remained so as of 2023. During this time, all of the buildings on the property had been demolished except for a small barn. Forensic analysis was difficult because the bodies were likely left to decompose, eaten by insects and/or pigs on the farm. Ugh. I know that pigs are said to literally eat anything, but it really sickens me to think that these poor animals had been purposefully fed human flesh. I really don't eat any pork products at all, aside from bacon, but this story is enough to make me even give that up. The pig farm became the largest crime scene in Canadian history. Investigators took 200,000 DNA samples and seized 600,000 exhibits. In the early days of the excavations, forensic anthropologists brought in heavy equipment, including two 50-foot flat conveyor belts and soil sifters, which would be used to find traces of human remains. March 10, 2004, the government had revealed that Pickton might have ground up the victim's flesh and mixed it in with the pork that he sold to the public. The province's health authority would later issue a warning. Ugh. Could you even imagine? Like, I can't even imagine how the public would have felt after they received this warning, especially if you like to eat pork. It just makes me nauseous just thinking about it. There was another claim that Pickton had allegedly fed the victims directly to the pigs. A preliminary hearing was held in 2003. The clothing and rubber boots that Pickton wore during the assault of the woman under the publication ban were seized by police from an RCMP storage locker. Lab testing performed in 2004 showed the DNA of two other women on these items. Pickton's trial began on January 30th, 2006 in Westminster. He would plead not guilty to the 27 charges of first degree. The voir dire phase, which is a legal term for procedures during a trial that help a judge decide certain issues like prospective jurors being questioned to decide whether they can be fair and impartial, witnesses being questioned to decide their competence to testify, and witnesses being questioned to decide the admissibility of evidence. This part took almost a year to determine which evidence might be admitted before the jury. The media was not allowed to disclose any material presented in arguments. On March 17th, Justice James William rejected the court on Jane Doe due to the lack of information on her identity and the time of her death. August 9th, Justice Williams would sever the charges, splitting them up into two groups, one group of 6 counts and the other of 20 counts. Proceedings continued on the group of 6, but the remaining 20 were stayed on August 4th, 2010. Due to the publication ban, details of the decision were not made available to the public. However, Justice Williams stated that trying all 26 counts at once would be an unreasonable burden on the jury because the trial could have potentially lasted up to 2 years and that it would likely have increased the possibility of a mistrial. So I totally agree with that because the last thing that you want is a mistrial in circumstances like this. You just want a nice, clean trial with hopefully the verdict that you want in the end. On January 22nd, 2007, Pickton faced the first-degree charges in the deaths of Marnie Frey, Serena Abbotsway, Georgina Papin, Andrea Josbury, Brenda Wolfe, and Mona Wilson. Eventually, the publication ban was lifted and details of the investigation uncovered were publicly released. Some of these details are as follows. A loaded .22 with a sex toy attached to the barrel with 1 round fired, boxes of .357 ammunition, night vision goggles, 2 pairs of faux fur-lined handcuffs, a syringe with 3 millimeters of a blue liquid inside, and Spanish fly aphrodisiac were all found inside Pickton's trailer. A videotape played for the jury showed Pickton claiming that he had attached the sex toy to the revolver as a makeshift silencer. Although revolvers are nearly impossible to silence in this manner. I don't even want to imagine what horrible acts were performed with that revolver. The terror that these women must have felt in their last moments of life, like I couldn't even imagine what it was like for them. There was another videotape that showed Pickton's friend Scott Chubb saying he told him that a good way to kill a female who was addicted to substances is to inject her with windshield washer fluid. In another tape, Pickton's associate Andrew Bellwood said that Pickton mentioned killing sex workers by handcuffing and strangling them, and then he would bleed and gut them before feeding them to the pigs. There were also photos of the contents of a garbage can found in Pickton's slaughterhouse, which held some of the remains of Mona Wilson. The jury found Pickton not guilty on 6 counts of first-degree murder, but found him guilty on 6 counts of second-degree on December 9, 2007. December 11th, 18 victim impact statements were read. Justice Williams sentenced Pickton to life without the possibility of parole for 25 years, which is the maximum punishment for second degree. Justice Williams stated, quote, Mr. Pickton's conduct was murderous and repeatedly so. I cannot know the details, but I know this. What happened to them is senseless and despicable. Now, I completely understand that it's extremely hard, apparently, to get a first-degree murder conviction, but I feel like in this case, because there were so many victims and the admission that he had killed 49 women, that in itself should have contributed to first degree, although I'm not complaining because at least he was put behind bars. However, I really don't like it when there's a possibility of anybody of this horrific, or anybody who performs these horrific acts could ever have the potential of being paroled at some point down the road, even if it's 1 year, 25 years, 30 years. I feel like they definitely shouldn't even get the privilege of even thinking that there's a possibility that they may be free again. The British Columbia Crown prosecutors kept open the possibility of trying Pickton on the other 20 counts at a later time. On August 4th, 2010, prosecutors made an announcement that they would not proceed with the other 20 counts. They claimed a second trial, even if more convictions were achieved, would not add anything to Pickton's sentence, which was already at the maximum possible under the law. This decision angered some of the families of the 20 victims, while others would state that they were relieved at being spared the experience of another long and difficult trial. This is a tough one, because if I were in their situation, I would totally want that ruling to be that this monster was officially guilty of murdering one of my loved ones. But at the same time, I understand, what's the point when he's not going to gain any more to a sentence, and putting all of the victims' families through all of that turmoil again just seems cruel. So I get it from both sides for sure. At a press conference, Deputy Chief Constable Doug Lepard of the Vancouver Police Department stated, quote, I wish from the bottom of my heart that we would have caught him sooner. I wish that the several agencies involved, that we would have done better in so many ways. I wish that all the mistakes that were made we could undo. And I wish that more lives would have been saved. So on my behalf and behalf of the Vancouver Police Department and all the men and women that worked on this investigation, I would say to the families how sorry we are for your losses and because we did not catch this monster sooner. I really like that. I like that they owned up, that they, could have or should have done more in the beginning, and that there was mistakes made. So good for good for them for admitting that and for, apologizing to the victims' families. Doesn't excuse any of it, but I'm glad that they at least, acknowledged it. On May 19th, 2024, Pickton was attacked by another prisoner while he was at the Port Cartier institution in Quebec. Martin Charest, who had a history of assaulting other prisoners, had speared Pickton in the head with a broken broom-like handle. Pickton was then airlifted to the hospital where he was put on life support. He would later die at the hospital in Quebec City due to complications of his attack. So what are your thoughts on this case? How do you feel about the way the police handled the case initially? Leave your thoughts and comments below. Don't forget to follow or subscribe to Crime Time 911 so you don't miss out on next week's episode. Thanks again for listening to Crime Time 911. Stay safe, stay curious, and remember to always trust your gut.